Computer. All right, hey, welcome. We're gonna knock out some enlightenment thinking today. Hopefully, everybody's having a great day or week or wherever you are in your world, and let's go. Here we go. So we're going to talk about the Enlightenment. We just finished up talking about absolutism, and so how do we get from absolutism to democracy, right? How do you go from divine right, where the king and queen control everything, to a direct democracy or representative democracy like we have in the United States, where we elect officials to act on our behalf? Well, the missing link, so to speak, is going to be this period of enlightenment. It's going to happen roughly from 1600 to 1800. It's going to be kind of kickstarted by the English Civil War, which we talked about. It's going to be strengthened by the ideas of the Glorious Revolution. And then the American Revolution is going to be kind of the fulfillment of the promise of the Enlightenment. And then the end of it is going to be the French Revolution and the start of the Industrial Revolution. Because out of the Enlightenment, you're going to have some ideas that come about from governments and man's relationship with government. But you're also going to have some ideas that pop up about man's relationship with the economy, or man's relationships with materials. And then you're also going to have the inventions of machines that are going to replace human labor in the production of goods. And that's going to lead us to something totally different, which is going to be the Industrial Revolution, which we'll talk about after this, after the Enlightenment and in the Revolution era that we're going to talk about next unit. Okay, so we're looking at this time period from roughly 1600 to 1800, and what we're trying to do is we're building off of, humans are always building off of what came before and what's going to go on afterwards. So you have the scientific revolution that's going to start out in the Enlightenment, or during the Renaissance. They're starting to ask some questions, and then as people and the common people become more literate, that increases everybody's intelligence. And people start to come up with broader ideas, right? And so we're looking at ways to use natural laws to how to govern human nature, right? And we just said that the Enlightenment starts back in the Renaissance, and people start to think about the world in the new way. If you remember the Renaissance from high school or from Western Civ 1, it's this period in which we turn away from the strict control of the Catholic Church over Europe, which had been in control of Europe for about, I don't know, 1,000 years. And we start to explore some past cultures like Rome and Greece, and we start to rediscover some of their ideas and some of their thinkings. And then we start to apply those ideas to modern society. One of the examples, one of the people that are going to kickstart this, age of reason, or the Enlightenment, is going to be Copernicus. And Copernicus is just sitting around. He's looking at the stars, right? He comes up with this crazy idea that the Earth is not the center of the universe. As the church taught, the church taught that the Earth stayed in one spot and the rest of the universe spun around the Earth, like the Earth and man were the center of everything. Well, it turns out Copernicus was right, and the sun is the center of the universe. And while most scholars reject his ideas in the 1500s, it's very charismatic that he comes up with this idea. Like, he spits this idea out, and bounces it off the wall, and he takes this idea from some of the Greeks. And anyways, some of the reasons that it's rejected is it's this fear that if one idea of the church is wrong, well, then everything could be wrong, and then society as we know it, or humankind as we know it, is totally different, right? So there's Copernicus, and he's looking at this heliocentric, is what we're going to call it, heliocentric model of the universe. If you look up at the night sky and you know what you're looking at, you can see all of those planets. You can see Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. And people would sit around and study the sky at night, and they would just track the movement of the stars and the planets. And he comes up with this idea, right? About 100 years later, not quite 100 years, but almost 100 years later, Galileo built a telescope in which he can watch the moons of Jupiter revolve around Jupiter. And you guys can go out and buy today, right now, a telescope for a couple $100 that's much more powerful than Galileo's telescope, right? And he's going to watch the moons revolve around Jupiter, and you can too. All right, so he believes that the sun moves around the Earth moves around the sun, similar to the moons around Jupiter. And this is this idea that's going to come about gravity, right? The problem is, again, the church believes the church is the center of the universe, and that Galileo, through his findings or through his theory, would prove that, hey, the church isn't always right, and humans can only scientifically know what they can prove. And so you get rid of this idea of faith and superstition. And it's problematic. And Galileo gets put on trial for heresy, which is crimes against the church, and he gets put under house arrest for the rest of his life. You know, his life is spared, but it's very problematic. He's very problematic for the power of the church, right? And so the scientific revolution that's going to be kickstarted by Copernicus and by Galileo is going to lead to this new way of thinking about the universe and only believing things that we can scientifically prove, not just things that we believe or things that we want to believe or whatever, right? So, like, personally, I want to believe that there's a Bigfoot somewhere. I probably realize there's not, but like deep down inside, I really want that, but I can't tell you that there is one because I can't scientifically prove it, right? And so, and how would I scientifically prove it? Well, I would use this thing called the scientific method. And so before the scientific method and before the scientific revolution, the only ways that we could prove any truths is if the Bible talked about them, right? And so new thinkers start to think, hey, you know what, that's probably not the best way to look at the world. And so let's see if we can't figure out a better method, and let's collect data and let's analyze our data and let's try to use that data to solve problems that we're looking into. And so you guys probably know this from, I don't know, middle school science, where you look at the scientific method, right? Which is a 7-step process where you state a problem, you know, hey, like, Bigfoot, you know, hey, state the problem. I want to believe that Bigfoot exists in the American Pacific Northwest. Well, so then I'm going to go out and I'm going to gather information on that problem. I'm going to go find firsthand accounts. I'm going to go sit in the woods and watch, right? And I'm going to form a hypothesis or an educated guess. And I'm going to say, hey, you know what? Bigfoot sightings are probably just black bears standing on their hind legs, right? And then I'm going to try to figure out some sort of an experiment to test my hypothesis. Maybe I'll capture a black bear and release them and have people watching and be like, hey, did you see the Bigfoot? Right? And then I analyze and record that. And then I state a conclusion. And then I repeat the steps over and over and over again until I get the same result on a consistent basis. Now, my example right there is absolutely flawed, but you can kind of see where we're going. Or I mean, I don't know, like a scientific method. Ice is water. Or ice is really water in a solid state. Well, what do? I take an ice cube and I melt it. All right. Well, every time I melt a ice cube, I'm going to get water if it is made out of ice, if it's not frozen something else, right? And so we go from there. All right. Some other thinkers that come out of the scientific revolution, Sir Isaac Newton, he's going to theorize gravity, right? And he's going to explain the way the planets move because they're held together by this invisible force. He's going to live in London during one of the plagues in the 1600s, and he moves out to his country estate. And country living in England must have been horribly boring in the 1600s because this guy invents calculus. He's just sitting around and invents calculus. And thank you, Isaac Newton, for dropping my college GPA, right? And ultimately, he believes that all the world can be explained through math and using mathematics. Francis Bacon is a French, Bacon and Descartes are French philosophers during the scientific revolution. And they believe in things like experimentation and observation. And he wants to make life better through the use of science. And so, I mean, that's where we are kind of today. Descartes believes that reasoning is the best way to understand. And so, like, you can just think about things and try to explain them that way. And both believe that truth is found through this process of investigation. And that's probably true. Like, if you look at little kids, they investigate things and then they try to figure out truths. Like, why can't I stand on the table? Well, little kids will probably stand on the table until they fall and they hurt themselves. And then once they fall and they hurt themselves, and they stop standing on that table. Maybe. Okay. And so this scientific revolution kind of changes the way that we look at the world. We have scientific breakthroughs. We have chemistry that starts to break down what items are made out of. We develop a cure for smallpox. And so science is making life better. And so as science is making life better, well, we're trying to apply these ideas of science to other things. And so we start to look at how can we rationalize human behavior? How can we rationalize this relationship between humans and their government, right? What are natural laws? What are things? What are what are the rule? What are the rules that oversee all of us, right? And so again, we're looking at this, and so what's the one thing that everybody is subject to? That's probably going to be rules by the government. And so, all right, so what is this relationship between man and government, and what's the relationship between man and himself? And if you're so inclined, you can hit that YouTube link on the thing and watch a short clip from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, in which you have a repressed citizen, and it makes me laugh. I can't show it to you on the Zoom link because of copyright infringements, but hey, if you're interested in that, have a little giggle. Okay, so the Enlightenment actually comes from a German thinker much later, after most periods are named after they happen. And so Immanuel Kant, he writes a publication called What is the Enlightenment, in which he argues that the Enlightenment is an enlightened man is somebody that thinks for himself, or an enlightened woman is someone that thinks for himself. And they question the accepted notions of any field of knowledge, and then they investigate it and they come back to it. Which brings up this question: is can somebody be over enlightened? I think with social media, sometimes we get to the point where, laypersons, people that aren't scientifically trained, we start to question the work of trained scientists. And while scientists, honestly, the job of a scientist is to be wrong. Like, scientists are supposed to be wrong so many times and then figure out how to be right. Where, the layperson wants to be right all the time. And, hear people spend their entire lives researching ideas or diseases or whatever. And then some guy just comes along with an idea in a YouTube video and attacks that. And so it's, the Enlightenment really gets us into this idea, like at least modern Enlightenment would get us into this idea of, is someone that presents a scientific argument well less right than someone that predicts or presents a unscientific argument entertaining? Or someone that presents a scientific argument very boring, because most scientific arguments are rather boring, versus someone that presents something that's unscientific but in an entertaining way that people enjoy watching. Okay, Immanuel Kant has a point that at the time there were new discoveries almost every month, and by applying inquiry towards improving life and organization of human society, one can make a better world. So we're trying to make the world better through science, right? And the Enlightenment is not one single movement of thinkers, but it's this collection of random ideas or ways that people think about life and literature and political thought and philosophy and science and all of these things, poetry, all these things that happen all at once, and they're just gathered up, right? And so roughly the Enlightenment pyramid, again, is 1600 to 1800, from the English Civil War through the start of the French Revolution. And the goal, again, is to make life better. And so some of these ideas that are going to come out of the Enlightenment, before we sit down and actually talk about people that specifically we're going to look at as Enlightenment thinkers, or that things that we believe today: all people are equal before the law. The best governments have rational laws and serve the public interest. Well, you go back and you look at this before the Enlightenment. Well, not all people are equal before the laws. The kings are above the law, right? And everybody's subject to the will of the king. The best governments have rational laws and serve the public interest. Well, during absolutism, the best governments serve the will of the king. The laws weren't written down. The king didn't like you. He'd just accuse you of being a bad guy and throw you in jail. There's a physical universe which you can understand using math and science and not superstition. It's not witches that are causing kids to get sick. It's bacterial infections, right? It's this rejection of superstition, and it's this idea of natural laws in which there's a benevolent supreme being that oversees everything, or maybe set everything in motion, but it's not like a God that is actively involved in our day-to-day lives. Some more ideas that come out of the Enlightenment are arguing against the church and any unjust church laws. And it's not an argument against the idea of a God or arguing against the power of the church, but maybe the corrupt power of the church. And they argue against tyranny, like, hey, kings need to have rational laws. They can't just do whatever they want. And so it's not necessarily a move to democracy as much as it is a move against bad kings. And so a lot of people would look at the Enlightenment and look at Great Britain as a great example, because they have written down laws and they have a constitution, and their powers are limited by Parliament, right? Causes of the Enlightenment, we already talked about the scientific revolution. We have this expanded urban reading class, literate classes, right? And large numbers of people in cities now can read, and even in a country can read, right? And so newspapers and magazines and novels start to share ideas, and people start to think and really enjoy that. And we also move away from Latin, which most people did not speak or did not write. That was the learned language of the church, to a common language, which was, you know, English, French, or Spanish, which could be communicated across large regions. And so it wasn't like you had these local dialects where you know, you might have 70 different languages spoken in French. Well, they all kind of get boiled down into a common French vernacular where everybody can share ideas, right? We're also going to look at, it's going to become very vogue for the middle class to host, in France, they're going to be called salons. And these are just ideas where you get everybody together, and maybe somebody gives a small lecture in somebody's sitting room about a topic, and then you discuss it. Or in England, you have coffee shops where people sit around and they drink coffee and they get all hopped up on coffee, and they talk about ideas and they get real excited. And so this is an intermixing of classes and an intermixing of ideas to freely express ideas and come together and talk about different things, right? And I think I'm going to stop this video right here, give you a little break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about specific people from this period. So I will see you guys here shortly, and thank you for watching.